So we are in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, and for me personally, when I try to study, I really like to understand a little bit of background and kind of understand the surroundings of what's happening at the place and time, and also interested in geography. For me, I'm a very visual learner, and it really helps me get a picture of what the writer is talking about. So Paul wrote the book of 1 Corinthians about AD 55. And so this AD 55, at this point, Paul was just about at the end of his three-year stint in Ephesus. So 3 years before, Paul had been in Corinth. And Phil, if you go ahead and bring up that first map for me. So if you look, the black line on the far left is Corinth, which is right next to Athens, Greece. And if you look on the right, the black underline is Ephesus. So Paul's in Ephesus, and he had just been in Corinth 3 years earlier. So there's a delegation that is sent to Paul from the church of Corinth. So there's a group of folks that come over and said, "Hey, we're having issues," so Corinth is, and Corinth and Ephesus both, but Corinth due to proximity, really close to Rome and really heavily tied to the Roman Empire. Phil, show me that second map. So if you look at the second map, on the left is Rome. So the first underline on the left is Rome. The one in the middle is Corinth. The one on the far right is Ephesus. Well, I'm sorry, the next to last one on the right is Ephesus. The far right is Jerusalem. Just to kind of give you that visual of where Paul has been and where he's going and where he is in relationship to Jerusalem. But also you can see how close Rome and Corinth are, and how easily they could be so heavily influenced by the Roman Empire. And there's a reason I wanted to point that out. But the delegation that was sent to Paul was sent to him to cover a few different issues that they were seeing and some problems that they were having at the church then. So some of those things that they brought to him, and some of the stuff was already been covered by Pastor Evans and by Brother Shiloh. But it was division among the church in chapter 1, morality issues that we talked about in chapter 5, legal issues between the members of the church. That's in chapter 6. The inappropriate practice of the Lord's Supper, that actually you'll hear about that next week in chapter 11. And then in chapter 15, there was some confusion about the resurrection of the body. So you'll hear about that coming up in just a few weeks. But and again, this is going to come into play a little bit later. What we're going to talk about, talking about again the Roman influence in AD 55 when Paul wrote this. Nero was the emperor of Rome. And you'll understand that a little better. He reigned from AD 54 to AD 68. And you're actually going to understand that a little bit better why I'm bringing that up here in just a minute. But I'm going to flip the chapter around just a little bit. So verses 1 through 13, Paul talks about the dangers of falling away. And then in 14 through 33, which is actually where we're going to start. We're actually going to start on verse 14. 14 through 33 is a continuation of chapter 8. So if you were here last week, Brother Shiloh taught on chapter 8 and chapter 9. And let's go ahead and actually read those right now. So 1 Corinthians chapter 10, starting with verse 14. Wherefore, and I'm just going to read 14 through 33. Wherefore, my dearly beloved, flee from idolatry. I speak as to wise men, judge ye what I say. The cup of blessing which we bless is not the communion of the blood of Christ. The bread which we break, is it not the communion of the body of Christ? For we being many are one bread, and all one body. For we are all partakers of the bread. Behold, Israel after the flesh, are not they which eat of the sacrifices partakers of the altar? What I say then, that idol is anything, or that which is offered in sacrifice to idols is anything. But I say that these things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to devils, and not to God. And I would not that you should have fellowship with devils. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of devils. You cannot be partakers of the Lord's table and the table of the devils. Do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than he? All things are lawful for me, but all things are not expedient. All things are lawful for me, but not all things edify. Let no man seek his own, but let every man another's wealth. Whatever is sold in the shambles that eat, ask no question for conscience sake. For the earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof. If any of them that believe not bid you to feast, and ye be disposed to go, whatsoever is set before you, eat, asking no questions for conscience sake. But if any man say unto you, this is offered in sacrifice unto idols, eat not for his sake that showed it, and for conscience sake, for the earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof. Conscience, I say, not thine own, but the other. For why is my liberty judged of another man's conscience? For if I by grace be partaker, why am I evil spoken of for that which I give thanks? Wherefore, whether therefore ye eat or drink, whatsoever ye do, do all to the glory of the God. Give none offense, neither to the Jews nor to the Gentiles, nor to the church of God, even as I please all men in all things, not to seek my own profit, but the profit of many that may be saved. So, tying that back again, if you weren't here for chapter 8, it'd be great to go back and read that. So basically, what Paul is trying to say here, chapter 8 gives it as a great context. So they were having an issue where other people were. So Paul is telling them specifically, if there was an animal who was specifically sacrificed for an idol's sake, and you know that, don't partake of that, because that is a pagan ritual, and you don't want to partake of that. But he was also very, very conscious of not offending other people, and really throwing your religion in someone else's face. And so that's why chapter 8 really gives us some really great context. And so that's why he tells us here, if you're going into someone else's house, or if you're going into the market, and you're going to buy meat, you especially sitting down with someone else at someone else's table. So if you can imagine walking up and coming to dinner and then asking, so, well, how was that meat prepared? Was this prepared for idols? Well, I can't touch that. I'm not. That's unclean, and that's unholy, and that's evil, and that's bad, and I'm not going to touch that meat. So that's the kind of contention that they were having. People were taking it upon themselves to be a little bit self-righteous, And Paul's telling them specifically here, yes, if you know that it is from idols, meat from idols, abstain from it. Just politely abstain. But you don't have to throw up, and you don't have to investigate, and you don't have to go and actually show yourself and try to put the other person down or belittle the other person because they may not believe exactly the same way that you do. That we don't have to put others in that situation to make them that uncomfortable. So, and that's why he says specifically, if you're sitting down at someone else's table and meat is given you, then eat it. But if it's announced to you that yes, this animal was part of sacrifice, then politely abstain. But don't go in with the holier than thou attitude and say I'm better than you. I'm holier than you. I can't touch that. And if you've lived any time, you've seen those kinds of peoples. And we're to live this life in our religion and our testimony and love for one another. And so we'll let God convict others on things that He needs to convict them on, and then we will walk according to how God convicts us. And so that's kind of the theme, 14 through 33, that Paul was trying to convey here. So I wanted to start with that, since that really kind of tied back to chapter 8, and the Lord really kind of gave me a different thought on the first 13 verses. So let's if you would back up to verse 1 and go 1 through 13. Moreover, brethren, I would not that you should be ignorant how all of our fathers were under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and did all eat the same spiritual meat, and did all drink the same spiritual drink, for they drank that spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. But with many of them God was not well pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. And overthrown there just means spread out in the wilderness. Now these things were examples, to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. Neither be ye idolaters, as were some of them. As it is written, the people that sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Neither let us commit fornication, as some of them committed, and fell in one day 23,000. Neither let us tempt Christ, as some of them also tempted, and were destroyed of serpents. Neither murmur ye, as some of them also murmured, and were destroyed of the destroyer. Now all these things happen unto them for ensamples or examples, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. Wherefore let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. There hath no temptation taken you, but such is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that ye are able, but will with the temptation also make a way of escape, that ye may be able to bear it. So, and it's really that 13th verse that really kind of stood out to me and hit home, and I'll tell you why here in just a minute. So if you actually back up and look at verse 27, the last verse in chapter 9, there Paul says, "But I keep my body and bring it unto subjection, lest that by any means, when I have preached to others, I myself should be a castaway." So again, remember the context that it's come. So you've had this delegation from Corinth come and say, "Listen, Paul, we've got all these issues in the church. All these things are going on." And so what Paul is doing in the 10th chapter, and again, this is a letter, the entire book of 1 Corinthians is a letter back to the church at Corinth. And actually Paul he was planning on going back to Corinth the winter following this, and actually did, and I think that's in We read that in Acts chapter 20. They actually did go back to Corinth after this. But so Paul's writing this letter, and what he's trying to convey to them at the beginning of this is he's given them the example of it. So he just gave him the example of himself, that I have to keep my body pure, I have to keep my flesh under subjection, or even me, this great apostle, this great leader, could be a castaway. And so this verse and 1 through 13, I think is one of the strongest cases for the way our church teaches, not to take away or put down what anyone else's belief is, but and we all are familiar that there's a lot of folks that believe that once you're saved, then you're forever covered and you're forever cleansed, no matter what you do or what happens. And these set of verses are some of the strongest pieces, in my opinion, to help solidify that, you know what, if Paul, as much as he did, and as wholeheartedly as he served the Lord, and as much as he sacrificed and gave himself, he was self-aware that if he did not keep himself under subjection, keep his flesh under subjection, and lean unto the Lord, that he himself would be a castaway. And so now he's actually continuing that theme at the beginning of chapter 10. So in continuing that theme, he starts rehearsing the children of Israel's exodus out of Egypt. And so he's telling them that they have to take their religion seriously, and they have to, because being so close to the Roman Church and to be in Athens in that area, if you know, you have a lot of Greek idolatry. There's a lot of Greek temples. If you read anything about that area, there's tons of history about that area. So there's a lot of things there that can skew you or skew your thoughts, as opposed to the approach to religion. And we'll talk a little bit that a little bit later too, a little bit more in depth. But he's really trying to convey through the story of the Exodus. And so he's telling them, said, listen, you have the children of Israel who fled Pharaoh. Now, and he really kind of goes through it when he tells us, did we not all eat the same spiritual meat, and did not all drink the same spiritual drink? For they drank that spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. So he's telling them, listen, they were brought out of Egypt. They were led by a cloud during the day. They were led by fire, a pillar of fire at night. The children of Israel they crossed the Red Sea. They saw the parting of the Red Sea, crossed the Red Sea, saw Pharaoh destroyed in the Red Sea. Once they got over, they saw fresh water pour from a rock that they were able to drink from. They literally had bread drop down in the morning out of the sky for them to eat, and then quail drop out of the sky in the evening for them to eat. Now, those folks saw all of that. This same group of people saw all of that. And guess what? None of them saw the promised land. That's the point that Paul is trying to drive home to the Corinthians. And so again, I think the case is, yes, I have seen all this, I have partaken of all this, but if yet I don't still refrain and commit myself and subject myself and get my flesh under subjection and submit to the will of the Lord, I can prevent myself from seeing the promised land. And that's how strongly that he's trying to convey this to the church at Corinth. And so So that's the overall theme that he was trying to get them to submit themselves unto the Lord and overcome temptation. But verse 13 is what really kind of sunk in my spirit when I was reading it last night, and really kind of grabbed me. And verse 13 tells us, "There hath no temptation taken unto you, but such is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that ye are able, but will with the temptation also make a way of escape, that ye may be able to bear it." So what really kind of hit me and struck me is that we live and we hear, we're all subject to what's happening to us recently, right? And what we see and hear in our lives. And we think, man, I have never seen a time of sin and debauchery and all kinds of foulness and all kinds of evil. And I'm talking about me too. I'm talking about myself. I had these very same thoughts myself. And so, it really made me think, this verse made me think of Ecclesiastes chapter 9. And in Ecclesiastes chapter 9, I won't get it exactly right. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 9. "What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun." So in that thought process, I said, okay, Lord, help me understand what you're trying to say here. And so I just doing some homework and doing a little study, and we're coming back. And the reason that I brought up Nero is that it gives us a great example. His life and what was going on in the Roman Empire at that time gives us a great example of how there is absolutely nothing new under the sun. God understands the temptations we suffer. God understands the things that we have to face. And so his word is just as applicable today as it was in AD 55 when Paul wrote this. So, we're talking about Rome, but you got to keep Athens in mind also. When we talked about all the idolatry in Athens, there was built a temple to Aphrodite. So Aphrodite for the Grecians is the goddess of fertility. But what you may or may not know, and is recorded in history when I started looking, is that so people would come and worship at the temple of Aphrodite. But did you know that there were male and female prostitutes, hired prostitutes, to actually work in the temple of Aphrodite? Something that and this is even, and it was still going on at this time, AD 55, but greatly predates what was happening here. But jumping back over to Nero. So Nero's father died when he was 3 years old. And his mom remarried, who was then, at that time, the current emperor, Claudius. Claudius had actually just taken over the emperorship from a name you may recognize, Caligula. Caligula was the Roman Empire, or the Roman emperor, that many of you, if anybody has seen the movie Gladiator, that the emperor in that movie is pretty well based on Caligula. Caligula loved the gladiator scene. He actually trained with gladiators and really wanted to embrace that part of it. He loved the theater of it, and he loved the destruction of, and we all know how they tortured and killed Christians. And so Caligula was that guy, which I thought was a pretty interesting fact. So Claudius actually takes over from Caligula after Caligula dies. And so Nero's mom marries Claudius, and her name is Agrippina. And so this kind of begins the story of Nero. And so Nero's mom, so Nero, again, was really young when they got married, but Nero's mom really had plans and had ambitions to actually run Rome. But obviously, being a female, she couldn't do that. And so her plan was to run and control Rome through Nero, through her son. And so, and she thought it was all going well because Claudius really loved Nero, really liked Nero. But then Agrippina notices that Claudius is now starting to take a shine to his own natural son that he has. And Claudius actually adopted Nero, made Nero part of the family. And so he was officially in the line now as being adopted. So he starts having affections, Claudius, towards his own natural son. Agrippina sees this, and she puts together a plot to take and have one of the servants poison her husband. And then she goes, not only does she have that plan, have that set in place, but then she also has a backup plan. She has a backup plan that if the delivery of the poison doesn't kill Claudius the first time, then she's got a doctor ready to come behind and actually finish the job and actually give him more to make sure that Claudius dies. And so she actually goes as far in the manipulation of the situation that she actually has all of Claudius's natural son, all of his tutors, all of his instructors, all of them replaced with people that are loyal to her, so she can actually manipulate that situation and make sure that Claudius's son doesn't get to reign. So Claudius is killed, and Nero becomes emperor. Now Nero is just 16 when this happens. And so it gives his mom the perfect opportunity to kind of sit behind in power, and everything goes okay for a little while. But then eventually, so Nero, a few years later, actually ends up marrying his stepsister, Claudius's daughter. And you think we're bad in Kentucky. He married his stepsister. But Agrippina's really liked the stepdaughter, and she really liked her. But Nero actually ended up having an affair with another woman. So Agrippina was really pushing. She was very controlling and trying to not only manipulate him and get him away from the lady that he was having an affair with, but also trying to run the state when he is the actual true emperor. And as you can imagine, it got to the point where Nero had enough of the manipulation. And so Nero then, Nero's wife actually dies. Some think it was in childbirth, but she actually passes away. But as a way to get his own power and to have his own place as emperor, Nero actually orders, his mom jumps on a ship, she's traveling. Nero actually orders that ship to be wrecked. And then, so the ship does wreck, the ship goes down. Nero's mom actually makes it to shore. She actually swims ashore. Nero actually had a backup plan. He actually had a servant there who killed his mom once she got on shore, and then made it look like suicide. And if you read anything about Roman history, assassinating political opponents was very, very commonplace. And then trying to cover it up. And does attacking your political opponents, does that sound familiar? We heard anything about that? And so he actually had a servant there waiting as she come ashore to actually kill her and then cover it up and try to make it look like suicide. So now Nero has executed the plan. Now he is the guy, and this really starts Nero's descent into depravity and actually losing his mind. So he gets so angry at one point that the lady that he had the affair with, that he loves dearly, he actually is, some historians say that he became so angry at her one time that he kicked her until she was dead. So he hit her and beat her and kicked her until she died. Now, he greatly mourns her afterwards. They actually, in Roman culture, they would normally cremate you. But he actually still loved her so much, even though he just killed her, that he actually had her embalmed like the Egyptians and actually had a temple and a tomb created for her and set up for her. But then, in the continuation of losing his mind and going crazy, if you read, there's a portion of Roman history that you'll hear called the burning of Rome, and it's popularly believed that Nero actually had Rome burned, so he could actually clear out and make a massive palace for himself that would include a 100-foot statue, a 30-meter statue, just short of a 100-foot statue of himself erected. And then all kinds of tropical plants and just make an unbelievable palace himself. So he actually burns down his own city to help create a palace, a grand palace for himself. So as you can imagine, Rome still has, the Senate is still in place at this time, and there still is a form of democracy in running at that time. And so they decided it's time to get rid of him. And there's one other thing that I want to point out with Nero is that, again, we think that we've seen things that have never been done. That's kind of the whole point of this whole story, guys, is that there's nothing new under the sun. Nero had a servant boy that greatly resembled the mistress that he had killed. Nero had that young servant boy castrated and married him in an official marriage ceremony, including a wedding veil and including a dowry, everything that was customary in the marriage that Nero did with this young boy. Again, there's nothing new under the sun. So obviously the Senate saw that Nero was completely out of control. And that this couldn't continue anymore. And so there's some that rose up and said, okay, we've got somebody that we want to appoint as emperor. We've got to get this guy out of here. And some of the folks that were loyal to Nero actually catch wind of it and try to stand against it. And when they rise up against the few senators that were trying to overthrow Nero, he tried to summon the armies to come against him, and even the armies actually turned against and said, "No, we're not saving Nero." And so Nero got wind of it, and he went into hiding. He got in disguise, and he left, and he knew that the end was near. That they were coming after him, and their way of dealing with you, as you can see in Roman times, was not particularly pleasant. So he knew the only honorable way would be to kill himself, for him to go out. But he couldn't bring himself to do it. So much so that he thought about it, and he tried time and time again and thought about how to kill himself. And so he even got to one point that he asked his servant to show him how to do it. So he asked his servant, okay, you kill yourself and show me how to do it. Show me how to do it. Now, that sounds like something Harold would ask Phil to do. Say, hey, Phil, won't you try this for me? But obviously the servant resisted and didn't. And so he finally got that servant to actually run him through with the sword and to kill him. And that's how Nero died in AD 64. So when Paul tells the people at Corinth, again, so let's go back. Let's go back to 13. There hath no temptation taken you, such as is common unto man. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that ye are able, but will with the temptation also make a way to escape, that ye may be able to bear it. So these were the times that the people were living in. These were the kind of things. So you saw political corruption. You saw deception. You saw murder. You saw infidelity, fornication. You saw homosexuality. You saw prostitution. All of these things that we think that are all fresh and thrown in our face, these guys were living, and the church at Corinth was really up close and personal with in AD 55. So when Paul tells us, he's writing from a place of experience. He's writing from a place that says, guys, I know what you're going through. The Lord knows what you're going through. And I'm a testimony. And so that's why he says he writes this word as an example for us to follow. That number one, yes, we are going to be faced with temptations. We are going to be faced with decisions to be made. But if we will, and also that if we decide to turn away, again, not forgetting the first part of chapter 10, in that if that we can see God move and we can live in it and we can walk in it and we can see all these glorious things, but we can still choose of our own accord to actually step away and decide to fall away and follow other and lean into the flesh and follow all these temptations. That we have the opportunity to do that, and God gave us the choice, the freedom of choice to be able to do that. But He also says that if we will lean unto the Lord, that He will make a way of our escape. And I've heard some people talk about verse 13, where He says that He won't put more on you than you can stand. And I know sometimes, and I can't help but circle back to what Brother Billy and Sister Trish are going through this morning. Sometimes it sure feels like it's more than you can stand. And I've heard some people say it's really not more. What the Lord was trying to tell us here is it's really not more than you can stand yourself, but He won't let you take any more than that you can tolerate with Him. If you have Him, if we have Him by our side, and if we lean unto Him, and if we trust Him, that He has made a way for us to escape all of those things. And so that scan my notes and make sure I didn't miss anything. But we take encouragement from the Word and that example, and knowing that God is with us. God is with us regardless. I know we've got probably about five more minutes before the second bell rings here. We'll go ahead and break a little bit early. Thank you all for coming. Brother Kenny's going to be preaching for us this morning. And Brother Shiloh will be preaching for us tonight. And I'll announce this again later. Tomorrow will be our official business meeting, Saints meeting and business meeting. And I want to encourage everyone again. I announced it last week. There's some things that the pastor and Brother Shiloh, we've talked about wanting to try to see if the congregation's interested in a discipleship program and some large group, group type meetings, large group, small group, whatever that may be. Really want, because normally we get 50 or 60 people out for the business meeting. And so we'd really like to get more people out because we really want your input. We really want to know what you guys think, if this is something you'd be interested in. As some of you may or may not know, my son Cameron is involved in ministry on the campus of University of Kentucky, and discipleship is a big part of what he does and works in that ministry. And so he's actually going to come and answer some questions for us about how their discipleship program works. So I encourage all of you to come out tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. We'll have our church elections and Saints meeting. So all of y'all, please come out for that. We'll be in intermission for just a little bit. Thank you.